The mediator's office smelled like stale coffee and carpet cleaner, the kind of smell that clings to places where people go to end things. I signed my name on the last page of the settlement agreement at 2:14 in the afternoon, on a Tuesday in March, and I felt nothing. Not relief, not grief, just the clean, clinical sensation of something finally being over. Warren was already on his feet before the ink dried. He buttoned his jacket, a jacket I had bought him for his 38th birthday, and he smiled at me with that easy practice smile I had spent 7 years mistaking for warmth. Lydia. He said my name like a period at the end of a sentence. No hard feelings. These things happen. Tiffany was waiting for him in the hallway. I could see her through the glass panel in the door, her posture loose and confident, her handbag resting on her forearm. I recognized the handbag. It was from a boutique on Peachtree Road that I used to love. I wondered if he'd taken her there, while I was in Cincinnati, closing a deal for Whitmore Properties. Warren pulled on his coat, nodded to the mediator, and then turned back to me one last time. "One more thing," he said, his voice dropping just enough to be private. "You think you can just snap your fingers and clean house at Whitmore? My family runs half the operations in that building now. My mother handles vendor relations. Curtis manages 2 of the biggest development accounts. Brenda knows where every financial body is buried. You try to pull them out, and the whole thing caves in on your father." He said it pleasantly, like he was giving me friendly advice. Then he left. I sat at the table for another 45 seconds, staring at the water stain on the ceiling tile above me. Then I picked up my keys and walked out. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 6 minutes before I picked up my phone. My father answered on the second ring. Harold Whitmore was 64 years old and had built his company from a 2-person office in Buckhead with a $10,000 loan from his own father. His voice on the phone was the same it had always been. Steady, a little rough around the edges, the kind of voice that had never once shaken in a board meeting. "It's done," I said. A beat of silence. "You all right?" I looked at the concrete pillar in front of my car. There was graffiti at the base of it, a name I couldn't make out. "I don't know yet." "That's honest," he said. "Where are you?" "Still in the garage." "Then go somewhere quiet and call me back in 20 minutes. Don't drive when you're like this." I didn't drive. I sat there and I thought about 7 years. I thought about the night Warren and I met at the Whitmore summer contractor event. Him in a borrowed blazer, laughing at something my father said, and me thinking, there's someone who understands what this family is about. I thought about how I had vouched for him, not just to my father but to myself, over and over. The way you keep touching a bruise to see if it still hurts. I called my father back in 14 minutes. He threatened the company, I said, on his way out the door. Said his family's too embedded to remove. My father was quiet for a long moment. I heard him set something down on his desk. "Lydia," he said slowly, "I've had a forensic accountant reviewing our books for the past 8 months. I have a full report. I've been waiting for you to be ready." I closed my eyes. How bad? Bad enough that the FBI field office in Atlanta has already been briefed. I exhaled slowly, pressing my forehead against the steering wheel. He had known. He had known, and he had said nothing, because he understood me well enough to know that I had to reach this moment on my own, that if he had forced it, I would have defended Warren out of sheer stubbornness, the way you defend a decision you know is wrong, because you've already paid too high a price to admit the mistake. "I need you at the office at 4 o'clock, I said. "I'll be there. Tell Leonard to pull together the termination paperwork for Gloria Brenda and Curtis Cole. Tell Doug I need building security on standby." I paused, and freeze their system access before I walk through the front door. "It's already drafted," my father said. There was something quiet in his voice that took me a moment to identify. It wasn't satisfaction, it was relief. "I'll see you at 4. I had not walked through the main entrance of Whitmore Properties as anything other than a visitor for the better part of 2 years. That sounds strange, I know. It was my family's company. My grandfather had framed the original deed. My mother had painted the watercolor that still hung in the lobby, a skyline of Atlanta at dusk. Soft and a little inexact, the way she saw everything. But during the marriage, I had made myself small inside that building. Warren's presence there had made me self-conscious in a way I couldn't fully explain until now. It was the way he talked over me in meetings. The way Gloria had started ing Warren on vendor emails that should have come directly to me. The way Curtis would redirect client questions to himself during site visits. It had happened gradually, the way all erosion happens, barely perceptible until one day you look down and the ground under your feet is just gone. I walked in at 4 o'clock in a gray blazer and my grandmother's pearl earrings. And the lobby went quiet in that particular way it does when everyone in a room processes something at the same time. Leonard was already waiting near the elevator bank, holding a manila folder, his expression composed. He'd been with Whitmore for 19 years. He'd known me since I was 12, coming in after school and doing my homework at the corner of the conference room table. All 3 access credentials deactivated at 3:50, he said quietly. Good. I turned to Doug, who stood at his left. If any of them try to enter the building, you call me first. Not the front desk, not anyone else. Me first. Doug nodded once. I took the elevator to the 14th floor, where my father was already seated at the head of the conference table. Beside him was a woman I didn't recognize. Late 40s, reading glasses, a legal pad covered in neat handwriting. This is Carol Vinson, my father said. She's been coordinating with the FBI field office. Carol Vinson extended her hand. Ms. Whitmore, I've been reviewing the financial analysis your father commissioned. We're ready to move forward when you give the word. I sat down, folded my hands on the table. Give me the short version. What she laid out in the next 20 minutes made the room feel very cold. Warren had been providing proprietary deal information to a competing firm, Harper & Associates, since approximately 18 months into our marriage. Bid amounts, client acquisition targets, development site assessments we had paid to commission. He had also worked with his sister Brenda, who managed accounts receivable, to approve inflated invoices from 4 vendors that were, in fact, shell companies. The total amount siphoned through those vendor payments over 3 years was just over $1.2 million. The data passed to Harper & Associates had cost Whitmore at least 2 contracts worth roughly $4 million in projected revenue. I listened to all of it without speaking. I thought about Warren's face in the mediator's office, that pleasant, easy smile. The way he'd said these things happen like it was a weather event, something no one was responsible for. When Carol Vinson finished, I looked at my father. I want formal termination letters hand-delivered to all 3 of them today, I said, and the vendor payment documentation forwarded to the FBI contact by end of business. My father gave me a single nod, slow and deliberate, the same nod he had given me at my college graduation. Gloria Cole arrived at the Whitmore Properties lobby the following morning at 8:47. I watched her on the security monitor from the 14th floor. She was wearing a cream-colored blazer and her good jewelry, the pearl set she had worn to our rehearsal dinner. And she was standing at the reception desk, speaking in a loud, controlled voice designed to sound dignified. It only came across as cornered. I could see other employees slowing their pace as they came through the lobby, pretending not to look while looking. I took the elevator down. Gloria turned when she heard me approach. For a moment, something flickered across her face, something almost like uncertainty. Then it hardened. Lydia, she straightened. I think there's been some kind of mistake. My badge didn't work this morning. My computer. There's no mistake, I said. This is completely inappropriate. After everything I've contributed to this company. Gloria, I kept my voice level. I'd like to finish this conversation privately. Conference room B. She came because she didn't have a better option. In conference room B, with 2 of Doug's staff standing near the door, I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward her. These are the invoice approvals from Brenda's accounts receivable queue over the past 3 years, I said. These 4 vendors, Meridian Supply, Coastal Build Partners, GFC Holdings, and Blue Ridge Consulting, processed a combined total of $1.2 million in payments from Whitmore Properties. None of them have a verified physical address. None of them have employees. Blue Ridge Consulting is registered in the name of your youngest son, Curtis. I watched her face. And this, I said, clicking to the next document, is a summary of communications between Warren's personal email and an account registered to Harper & Associates, including the attachment logs. The attachments include a site assessment report that cost us $60,000 to commission, and a full client acquisition target list from our 2022 strategic planning retreat. The color left Gloria's face in stages, the way it does when a person realizes they've been outmaneuvered, rather than just accused. She tried 2 or 3 things in the next few minutes. She tried indignation. This is doctored. This is harassment. She tried appeal. I'm Warren's mother. I was only trying to help my son build something for himself. She tried threat. You'll regret making an enemy of this family. I let her finish each one. Gloria, I said finally. The FBI field office in Atlanta has already received the full documentation package. This is no longer a Whitmore Properties matter. I'd strongly recommend you contact a criminal defense attorney today. I stood up. Leonard will walk you out. Your personal belongings from your office will be boxed and available at the front desk tomorrow morning. She left. She was crying by the time she reached the elevator, loud, heaving sobs I could hear from the hallway. Several employees looked away from their monitors. I stood at the window at the end of the corridor and watched the Atlanta skyline, gray and wide and indifferent, and I felt, for the first time that week, something that might eventually become peace. Warren texted me 3 days later. He wanted to meet. He said he owed me an apology and wanted to explain himself. I agreed because I wanted to close the door myself, not have it slam shut behind me. We met at a place in Midtown we had gone to early in our relationship, before everything calcified. It was a Tuesday afternoon and the lunch crowd had thinned out. Warren was already there when I arrived, sitting in the back booth with a coffee going cold in front of him. He looked diminished. That was the only word for it. The particular kind of shrinking that happens to people whose confidence was borrowed from someone else's resources. Lydia, he looked up, thank you for coming. I sat down across from him without taking off my coat. Tiffany left, he said. When I didn't respond, he went on. 2 weeks ago. Moved in with someone else, he exhaled. I know what you're thinking. You don't, I said. He started something that resembled an apology. It was rehearsed. The right words in roughly the right order, but assembled rather than felt. He talked about his childhood, about his fear of failure, about how being inside a successful family had made him feel both elevated and threatened. At some point, he reached across the table toward my hand. I moved my hand to my lap. Warren, I said quietly, I didn't come here to give you absolution. He blinked. I reached into my bag and placed a document on the table between us. This is a copy of the full evidence packet that's been filed with the FBI. Page 12 is the attachment log with your personal email in the header. You'll want to look at it before you speak to an attorney. His jaw tightened. Lydia. What you did wasn't a mistake. Mistakes are accidents. You made a calculation over and over for years, and you decided that my family's work was yours to take. I stood up, tucked my bag under my arm. Hire a good lawyer, I mean that. I left a 20 on the table for the coffees neither of us had touched. Outside, it had started to rain, that particular Atlanta March rain that can't decide if it's winter or spring. I stood under the restaurant's awning for a moment and watched the street. I felt no triumph. I didn't want to feel triumph. I wanted to go home, sit with my dog, eat something I'd cooked myself, and let the quiet of a life without deception settle over me like something I'd almost forgotten how to recognize. The worst evening came 6 days after that. I was at my father's house in Buckhead, a wide, quiet property with a magnolia in the front yard that had been there since before I was born, when his housekeeper knocked on the study door and said there was a situation at the front gate. I looked at the security camera feed on my father's desktop. Gloria Cole was standing at the end of the driveway in the Atlanta evening drizzle, and she had brought Warren's son with her. His name was Miles. He was 14. Warren's son from a relationship before we had ever met, a fact Warren had disclosed to me early in our courtship, and one I had genuinely tried to honor during our marriage. Miles lived primarily with his mother in Savannah and visited Warren occasionally. He was a quiet kid, thin, with Warren's eyes and none of Warren's ease. Gloria had hung a handwritten sign around his neck. It read, Mr. Whitmore, please don't let our family be destroyed. Miles was standing very still in the drizzle, his shoulders tight, his face turned down. He was not crying. He looked like someone who had been placed somewhere deeply against his will and was waiting for it to be over. My father got up from his chair without a word and picked up his cane. Open the gate, he said. I followed him outside. Gloria started speaking before we'd crossed half the driveway. Her voice was high and ragged, a performance of grief that had lost whatever shape it once had. She said things about loyalty and sacrifice and Warren giving his best years to this company. She kept gesturing toward Miles. as if his presence made her argument for her. My father stopped about 10 feet from her. He looked at Miles for a long moment. "Son," he said, "will you come stand over here with me?" Miles looked up. Something moved across his face. Surprise, maybe, or the recognition that someone was actually speaking to him rather than through him. He stepped forward. My father bent down slightly, reached out, and lifted the sign off over Miles's head. He folded it once, carefully, and held it at his side. Then he turned to Gloria. "I have a question for you," my father said. His voice was quiet. It was the voice he used when he was at his most serious, when every word was being chosen with precision. "What were you hoping this boy would feel, standing here in the rain with a sign around his neck? What were you hoping he would carry away from tonight?" Gloria opened her mouth. My father didn't let her. "This child has done nothing wrong. His father is responsible for his own choices. His grandmother is responsible for hers." He paused. Miles is not a bargaining chip. Gloria's face crumpled. She began to cry in earnest now, not the performative crying from before, but something messier and more honest. Miles stood next to my father and looked at his grandmother with an expression I will not forget. It was not anger. Exactly. It was something older than anger. It was the look of someone who has understood something about the adults in their life that they did not want to understand and cannot unknow. He reached up and very deliberately straightened his jacket collar, a small, precise gesture, and said to my father, "I'm sorry she brought me here, sir. I didn't know she was going to do this." "I know that," my father said. "My mom's car is parked around the corner," Miles said quietly. "She was waiting for me. She didn't know either. She thought this was just going to be a regular visit." My father nodded. "Go on then, it's raining." Miles walked away down the driveway, not hurrying, just steady. At the end of the block, I could see a pair of headlights, and when he reached them, the passenger door opened from the inside, and he got in, and the car sat there for a moment before pulling away. My father watched until the taillights disappeared. Then he turned back to Gloria, who had run out of things to say. "I'm not going to call the police tonight," he said, "but I'm going to ask you to go home. Whatever comes next in the legal process, your attorney will advise you. There's nothing for you here." She left, slowly, and then all at once she left. My father and I stood in the driveway for a while after that, in the thin rain, not talking. The magnolia was dark against the sky. I could hear traffic somewhere on West Pace's Ferry Road, the city going on with itself the way cities do. The final piece arrived by phone call 3 weeks later. Warren had attempted to access Whitmore's document management system using an old cloud backup login that had been overlooked in the initial credential sweep. He'd been after the current client acquisition pipeline, information he presumably intended to sell or use to negotiate some arrangement with Harper and Associates. The FBI had flagged the access attempt within 4 minutes. They had been monitoring for exactly this. My attorney called me at lunch. I put my fork down, listened, thanked her, and hung up. I sat there for a moment in the quiet of my kitchen, afternoon light coming through the window over the sink, and I thought about the Warren I had met at that summer contractor event, laughing, in his borrowed blazer. I had believed in that version of him, completely. And I didn't feel vindicated. I felt something closer to grief. Not for him, but for the years I had given to a story that was never true. That same afternoon, Warren's father Raymond called. He was a retired middle school vice principal who had spent the entire duration of his son's unraveling, making himself aggressively absent. I had never particularly disliked Raymond. He was the kind of man who stood in the corner of every room, smiling vaguely, contributing nothing, offending no one. "Lydia," he said, he sounded exhausted, "I want you to know I'm deeply ashamed of Warren and of Gloria." "I appreciate that, Raymond. I filed for legal separation from Gloria last week." He paused. "I don't want you to think I'm calling to ask for anything. I wanted to say it. What they did to your family was wrong. You didn't deserve it." "No," I said, "I didn't." A silence. Then, "Miles asked about you. He said to tell you he hopes the company is doing okay." Something moved in my chest, small and warm. "Tell him it is," I said. "Tell him thank you." I meant it. 4 weeks later, my father and I drove out to Sweetwater Creek State Park on a Sunday morning, the way we used to when I was a kid and my mother was still alive. She had loved that park. The red clay banks, the ruins of this old textile mill, the way the light came through the trees onto the water in the late morning. We took the same trail we had always taken. My father was slower now than he used to be, but he still walked without stopping, the way he did everything. At the bend where the creek widened, we sat on a flat rock, and he poured coffee from the thermos he had owned for 30 years. The one with the dent in the side, from when I dropped it at age 9 and spent a week convinced he'd never forgive me. I need to ask you something, I said. He handed me my cup. Go ahead. Did you ever want to just step in, during the marriage, when you could see what was happening? He was quiet for a while. The water moved over the rocks. A bird called somewhere in the pines across the bank. Every single day, he said. Why didn't you? He wrapped both hands around his thermos cup and looked at the creek. Because you are not someone who can be talked out of a mistake. You are someone who has to walk all the way through it and understand it from the inside. He paused. Your mother was the same way. I looked at the water. She would have handled this better than I did, I said. She would have cried more, my father said, and then she would have handled it exactly the way you did. We sat there for a long time, drinking our coffee while the morning moved around us. The city was an hour away, and it might as well have been a different world. Here there was just water and light and the particular silence of a place you have loved long enough that it knows you back. The company, I said finally. What do you need from me going forward? My father smiled, a small smile, the kind that carries more history than it lets on. I need you to run it, he said, like it belongs to you, because it does. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed something on the rock between us. A key, a physical key, old brass, worn smooth, attached to a plain key ring with the Whitmore Properties logo pressed into the rubber grip. I recognized it. It was the key to the original office in Buckhead, the one from before they'd moved to the current building, before the expansion, before any of it. He'd kept it for 30 years. I picked it up. It was warmer than I expected. That's not just symbolic, he said dryly. The locks in Suite 200 actually need rekeying, and I keep forgetting to call the locksmith. I laughed, genuinely laughed, for the first time in what felt like months. We walked back along the trail together, my father and I, and the morning was very clear, and the world for the moment was uncomplicated. I have thought a lot about what it means to trust your own judgment after spending years having it quietly dismantled. I don't have a clean answer. What I know is this. There is a difference between forgiveness and recklessness, between giving people the benefit of the doubt and ignoring the evidence laid out plainly in front of you. I gave Warren too much of the latter for too long, and the only reason I can say that honestly now, without flinching, is because it cost me something real, and I paid the full price, and I'm still here. The company is doing well. Miles sent a message 3 months later, through his mother, who emailed my work address, asking whether Whitmore Properties had any summer internship programs for high school students interested in real estate. I forwarded it to Leonard with a note attached. Set something up. Make it real work, not filing. Some things you lose. Some things you build back. And occasionally, in the margins of a story that cost you everything, something small and entirely unexpected turns out to be worth keeping. Ladies and gentlemen, wherever you're listening from tonight, thank you for being here. I want to leave you with something simple, because the truth usually is simple, even when it takes years to find. The people who genuinely love you do not make themselves smaller to lift you up. They make you bigger, even when it is painful to watch. And the people who exploit your love do not announce themselves at the door. They arrive quietly with easy smiles and borrowed blazers, and they stay until the locks are changed. Change the locks. Do it while you still can. This is Soul's story. If this reached you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.